HOA Karen invades black man's lake mansion with 100 guests. He sued them for $100,000 each and won. Anthony Harris had worked his whole life for that mansion. Decades of sacrifice, countless late nights, and endless grind had finally paid off. Nestled by a quiet lake, the home wasn't just a house, it was his sanctuary. The wide glass walls opened to breathtaking sunsets, and a gentle lap of the water against the shore was his peace after years of struggle. For Anthony, a successful entrepreneur and one of the very few black residents in the wealthy lakeside neighborhood, this was a dream come true, a symbol of dignity, perseverance, and triumph. But peace doesn't last long when arrogance and entitlement arrive at your doorstep. Karen Whitfield, the HOA president, had always believed she owned the community. To her, the rules weren't just guidelines, they were her commandments. She inspected lawns with a ruler, issued fines for cars parked slightly outside painted lines, and treated neighbors as though they were tenants under her reign. For years, she had dominated everyone around her with her petty power trips. But when Anthony moved in, her control began to feel threatened. She didn't see him as a neighbor. She saw him as an outsider, a man who, in her mind, didn't belong in a multi-million-dollar lakeside mansion. She began gossiping with the board, telling others that Anthony's home should be shared with the community because it had lake access. Some laughed it off, but Karen, she meant every word. And then, one Saturday afternoon, Anthony's nightmare began. He returned from a quick business trip, expecting silence and stillness. Instead, the driveway was packed with cars. His lawn was littered with coolers, towels, and folding chairs. Loud music echoed off the water. Over 100 people, complete strangers, had taken over his property. Children were running through his private dock, families splashed in the lake, and beer cans floated in his infinity pool. Anthony froze in disbelief. This was his mansion, his sanctuary, his safe place, and now was being treated like a public park. At the center of it all stood Karen. In her wide sun hat and oversized sunglasses, she smiled proudly as though she were hosting her own personal festival. When Anthony confronted her, demanding to know what was happening, Karen didn't flinch. "This home has community lake access," she sneered. "As HOA president, I've declared it open to everyone. We're all entitled to enjoy it. You can't just keep this to yourself." Anthony was stunned. She had unilaterally declared his private mansion community property. Strangers were walking through his bedrooms, using his bathrooms, and lounging on his furniture as though it were a resort. Anthony had two choices: erupt in rage and risk the situation spiraling into chaos, or quietly begin gathering evidence for a battle that would shake the neighborhood. He chose the latter. Anthony took photos, videos, and recorded Karen's statements. He called the police, but by the time they arrived, Karen had manipulated the scene, claiming he was overreacting and the community was just enjoying the lake. The officers couldn't do much beyond asking people to leave. But Anthony wasn't just thinking about today. He was thinking about justice. And justice, he knew, could be bought with patience, evidence, and the right courtroom. Because if Karen thought his mansion was hers, she was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her life. Anthony didn't sleep that night. He sat on his deck, staring out at the calm lake, but inside his heart was storming. The invasion wasn't just about loud music or strangers in his pool. It was about disrespect. It was about a woman, fueled by entitlement and prejudice, deciding that his hard-earned sanctuary wasn't really his. The more Anthony replayed the scene in his head, Karen smirking, neighbors partying in his living room, strangers lying on his couch, the angrier he became. But anger alone wouldn't solve this. If he lost his temper, Karen would twist the narrative and claim he was the aggressor. That's how she operated: manipulation, intimidation, and weaponizing her position as HOA president. So Anthony decided on a strategy. He would treat this not as an emotional violation, but as a legal case. And to do that, he needed more than frustration. He needed airtight evidence. The very next morning, Anthony walked the property with his phone camera. He documented everything: broken furniture, muddy footprints across imported rugs, water damage near the pool, missing electronics, and beer cans floating in the lake. He photographed scratches on the hardwood floors, cracked glassware, and even an expensive art piece that had been knocked off its pedestal. But more than property damage, Anthony focused on trespass evidence. The videos he captured of Karen admitting she opened the mansion to the community became his smoking gun. The casual laughter of strangers splashing in his pool was background music to what would become his case file. Later, he checked his security cameras, and what he found shocked even him. Guests had entered nearly every room of his house, some rummaging through his office drawers, others using his master bathroom. A group of teenagers had even set up a mini bar in his kitchen, mixing drinks with his liquor collection. To Karen and her entourage, Anthony's mansion wasn't a home. It was a playground. Still, Karen underestimated him. When Anthony confronted her again days later, she waved him off like he was being dramatic. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," she scoffed. "We'll clean up. No harm done. Besides, you should feel honored. Your property is the jewel of this neighborhood. Everyone deserves to enjoy it." Anthony stared at her, amazed at the audacity. "This isn't a park," he said slowly. "This is my home. You had no right." Karen smirked. "As HOA president, I can make decisions for the community. And this community says we deserve access." That was it. That was the sentence Anthony knew would cost her everything. The next week, Anthony met with his attorney, a sharp black lawyer named Marcus Reynolds, who had built his reputation taking down bullies in suits. Marcus listened patiently as Anthony laid out every detail, then leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a confident smile. "They walked into your home without permission. That's trespassing. They used your property for their own gain. That's conversion and possibly theft. And Karen? She abused her authority. Under the HOA. That's grounds for civil damages." Marcus tapped the table. "We don't just have a case. We have a gold mine." Anthony raised an eyebrow. "How much are we talking?" Marcus leaned forward. "Every single person who stepped foot inside your home is liable. We can sue each one of them individually for damages. If we ask for $100,000 per trespasser, the math gets very painful for them very quickly." Anthony's jaw tightened. "Do it." The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks later. Karen and the 100-plus guests who had invaded the mansion each received a notice. They were being sued for $100,000 apiece. The total damages sought, over $10 million. The neighborhood exploded in gossip. Some residents panicked, begging Karen to fix the mess. Others distanced themselves, shocked at her recklessness. But Karen? She doubled down. She called Anthony greedy, accused him of trying to bankrupt his neighbors, and even went on social media claiming she was the victim of racist targeting. But for once, Karen's manipulative charm wasn't working. Because this time, Anthony had the truth, the evidence, and the law on his side. And when the case reached the courtroom, the whole country would soon be watching. The day of the first court hearing felt like stepping into a movie. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse, microphones flashing, headlines already buzzing with phrases like HOA president sued for turning mansion into playground, and lakefront invasion lawsuit hits $10 million. What had started as one woman's arrogance was now a public scandal. Anthony walked into the courtroom with quiet determination. He wore a tailored navy suit, his expression calm but unyielding. This wasn't just about money. It was about respect. Across the aisle sat Karen Whitfield, HOA president, dressed in white as though trying to play the role of an innocent angel. But her eyes betrayed her, sharp, defensive, and still full of entitlement. Behind her sat several of the so-called guests who had partied in Anthony's home that night. Some looked ashamed, whispering nervously to one another. Others stared stubbornly at the floor. But Karen? She sat tall, her arms crossed, radiating defiance. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Marcus Reynolds, Anthony's attorney, stood first. His voice was firm, his words surgical. "Your Honor, this is not a case of a small misunderstanding. This is about a deliberate act. A homeowners association president deciding she had the authority to strip a man of his right to privacy, to open his private property to over 100 people as if it were a public park. This is trespass. This is invasion of privacy. This is abuse of power. He presented the evidence methodically. Photos of damage. Security footage of strangers walking through Anthony's master bedroom. A recording of Karen declaring that the home was community property. Each piece tightened the noose. When videos of teenagers mixing drinks in Anthony's kitchen played on the screen, the courtroom gasped. The judge's brow furrowed. Marcus continued, his voice steady. The law is clear. A home is sacred. No HOA president, no neighbor, no mob of partygoers can rewrite property rights. Then came Karen's turn. Her attorney rose, speaking with polished theatrics. This case, Your Honor, is being exaggerated beyond reason. My client did not intend harm. The HOA bylaws state that the lake is shared by the community. The gathering was merely an extension of that, neighbors enjoying the lake access. Mr. Harris is attempting to weaponize the courts to profit from a situation that caused him no real harm. Karen herself then took the stand. She straightened her back, her voice dripping with faux innocence. I only wanted to create a sense of community. We weren't stealing. We weren't violent. We were simply sharing the beauty of the property. And frankly, Mr. Harris overreacted. He has turned what should have been a neighborly event into a money grab. The jury shifted uncomfortably. For a moment, Karen's performance seemed convincing. But Marcus was ready. On cross-examination, he dismantled her carefully crafted narrative piece by piece. Mrs. Whitfield, Marcus began smoothly. Do the HOA bylaws give you the right to open someone's private living room to strangers? Karen hesitated. No, but do the bylaws allow you to grant access to a homeowner's bedroom? Her face flushed. Of course not. Yet people were in Mr. Harris's bedroom, were they not? Marcus displayed a still from the security footage, strangers walking past Anthony's king-size bed. The jury leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Karen stammered. I couldn't control everyone. Exactly, Marcus interrupted sharply. Because you had no authority to invite them in the first place. You abused your role as HOA president and violated my client's constitutional right to private property. The room was electric. Karen's mask was cracking. Anthony watched silently, his hands folded. He didn't need to speak. The truth was unraveling Karen's defense more effectively than any outburst could have. By the time Marcus finished his questioning, Karen's earlier confidence had dissolved into visible frustration. Her face was red, her voice shaky. The jury had seen enough. But the trial wasn't over, because next, Marcus had prepared something Karen never expected. Testimony from her own neighbors, who were ready to expose her years of power abuse. And once they spoke, there would be no going back. The courtroom felt heavy with tension as Marcus Reynolds rose once again. He had already exposed Karen's lies, but now he was ready to strike the final blow, and he would do it using Karen's own neighbors, the very people she believed were loyal to her. Your Honor, Marcus said, adjusting his glasses, the plaintiff would like to call several community members to testify. Karen's face twitched. For the first time, her composure wavered. She leaned toward her attorney, whispering fiercely. She hadn't expected this. After all, for years she had ruled the neighborhood with intimidation and fines. Surely they wouldn't dare speak against her. Not in public, not under oath. But one by one they did. The first to take the stand was an elderly man named Richard Caldwell, who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. I've seen Mrs. Whitfield abuse her power for years, he said. She fined me $500 once because my grandson's basketball hoop was left outside overnight. She told me if I didn't pay, she'd put a lien on my house. She's treated this neighborhood like her kingdom. And when she opened Mr. Harris's home, I wasn't surprised. Shocked, yes. But surprised? No. That's exactly the kind of thing she'd do. Karen's jaw tightened. She shook her head violently, mouthing liar. But Richard's words had landed. Next came Angela Morris, a young mother. Her tone was sharper, filled with anger. She humiliated my family, Angela declared. When my kids drew chalk on the sidewalk, she called it graffiti and threatened to sue us. She's fined people for bird feeders, for flowers that weren't HOA-approved colors. And when she invited people into Mr. Harris's home, She sent an email bragging about it. I have it right here. Gasps filled the courtroom as Angela held up a printed email. Karen's own words, boasting about turning Anthony's lakefront home into a community celebration. Marcus submitted it into evidence, and the jury's eyes widened. Karen's attorney buried his face in his hands. But the most powerful testimony came last, from a neighbor named Daniel Price, a man who had initially attended the mansion takeover party. His voice cracked with guilt as he spoke. I was there, Daniel admitted. I went along with it, because Karen told us it was allowed. She said Anthony was being selfish, that he was keeping the lake to himself when the community deserved it. I trusted her. But the second I stepped inside and saw people using his house like a resort, I knew it was wrong. I should have left, but I didn't. And for that, I'm sorry. He turned toward Anthony. Mr. Harris, you didn't deserve that. No one deserves that. Anthony gave a slow nod, silent but powerful. Karen couldn't hold back any longer. She stood up suddenly, pointing at the witnesses. They're all liars, she shouted, her voice echoing. Ungrateful liars. Everything I did was for this community. I gave them order, I gave them structure, and this is how they repay me? By siding with him. The judge slammed the gavel. Mrs. Whitfield, you will sit down and remain silent, or I'll hold you in contempt. The jury exchanged glances. Karen's outburst had destroyed what little credibility she had left. Instead of the calm, responsible leader she tried to portray, she now looked unhinged, the tyrant her neighbors had described. When the testimonies ended, Marcus delivered his closing statement. His voice was steady, commanding, and deliberate. This case isn't just about one man's home, he said, pacing slowly before the jury. It's about the principle that every American, no matter their color, no matter their background, has the right to feel safe in their own sanctuary. That right was trampled by Mrs. Whitfield and by every individual who trespassed into that mansion. And if we allow this behavior to go unpunished, then no home in this country is truly safe. The jury's faces were unreadable, but the weight of his words hung in the room like thunder. The case was now in their hands. The jury deliberated for hours. Inside the courtroom, the tension was unbearable. Anthony sat quietly, his hands folded, his expression calm but heavy with anticipation. Karen, on the other hand, paced nervously, whispering furiously to her attorney, her once confident facade now crumbling. When the jury finally returned, the entire room held its breath. The foreperson stood, reading slowly. In the matter of Harris versus Whitfield et al., we find in favor of the plaintiff, Anthony Harris. A wave of relief rippled through the courtroom. Anthony closed his eyes for a brief moment, exhaling years of tension in one breath. The foreperson continued. We award damages of $100,000 against each of the 102 defendants named in the case, including Karen Whitfield. The math hit like a thunderclap. Over $10 million in damages. The reaction was explosive. Karen gasped, her mouth falling open in disbelief. She shook her head violently, shouting, No, this isn't fair. He doesn't deserve this money. This is my community. Her voice rose into a shriek, but the judge's gavel silenced her. Order in the court. Anthony didn't gloat. He didn't shout in victory. He simply sat still, the weight of the verdict settling in. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming his dignity, about proving that no one, not even a power-drunk HOA president, could strip him of his rights. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed as microphones crowded Anthony's face. Mr. Harris, how do you feel about winning over $10 million in damages? One shouted. Anthony paused before answering, his voice calm and steady. This was never about the money. This was about the principle. A man's home is his sanctuary. It doesn't matter who you are or what title you hold. You don't get to take that away from someone. Not from me. Not from anyone. His words struck deeper than any headline could. For millions watching across the country, Anthony had become a symbol, not just of legal victory, but of standing tall in the face of arrogance, discrimination, and abuse of power. Karen, meanwhile, became infamous overnight. Her name trended on social media under hashtags like hashtag HOA Karen and hashtag Mansion Takeover. Memes mocked her arrogance. News outlets replayed clips of her courtroom outburst on a loop. She had gone from HOA queen to public villain. Financially, she was ruined. The damages bankrupted her, and many of the 100 guests she dragged into her reckless stunt faced life-changing consequences as well. Some lost their homes. Others had their wages garnished. And all of them carried the permanent stain of a legal judgment that would follow them for years. But for Anthony, justice wasn't just in the money. It was in the message. Weeks later, Anthony stood once more on his deck, looking out at the same lake that had once been invaded. The water glistened under the golden sunset, peaceful again. His mansion was his sanctuary once more. Not a playground, not a battleground, but a home. Marcus joined him that evening, holding a glass of iced tea. "You know," he said with a faint smile, "you didn't just win a case. You set a precedent. Homeowners across the country are going to use this to protect themselves against HOA abuse." Anthony nodded. "Good. Because no one should ever have to go through what I did." Justice had been served. The mansion was his again, and Karen Whitfield, once the untouchable ruler of the neighborhood, had become the cautionary tale of what happens when arrogance collides with the law. For Anthony Harris, it wasn't just a victory. It was vindication.